Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today, our meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to House Order of June 23rd, 2002. Members are in person in the room and by Zoom. For those of you who are testifying, you'll have 5 minutes for your opening statements. For everyone, please wait until I recognize you. Comments and questions are through the chair. We have interpretation services on the bottom of your screen. There's a little globe icon. You can flip between English and French, or just listen the floor, which is without interpretation. Is this accurate? As an individual, Ali Karimi, Assistant Professor from the University of Calgary by video conference, from the Canadian Hazara Humanitarian Services, Ibrahim Mohebi, President by video conference, also Shamim Ahmadi, Settlement Manager, again from the Canadian Hazara Humanitarian Services. Also, as individuals, we have Melissa Kerr, I apologize about your family name, Venda, Assistant Professor by video conference, and Mohid Rajabi in person. Thank you for being here. Thank you again, everyone, for your patience. We're studying the situation of Hazaras in Afghanistan. We'll start off with Mr. Mohid Rajabi. Please, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thanks for having me here. So I want to say thanks Canada for their mission in Afghanistan for peacekeeping. And I want to say thanks to Canadian government for helping the refugees during the badly needed of refugees of Afghanistan to help them, bring them to Canada and help them out. And also I appreciate thanks you guys that accepted me here to come and be here and be witness of the genocide of Hazara during 1891, 1892. Obviously, at that time, 62% of the Hazara people got killed, and swiped out mentality was going on at that time in all the Hazara society in Afghanistan. So in Orizgan province, almost like every single person got killed, and the Amir Abdurrahman Khan ordered to bring 6,000 of Durrani people from Kandahar district, from Kandahar, and then about 4,000 people from Ghiljai tribe to bring it to Orizgan and resettle them there in their land, in their house. So it's very tragic situation when it was happening there. What I'm talking about mostly are based off what my grandma was telling me in the history of her eyewitnesses. And also the books I mentioned, there is four or five different books that I mentioned them, and it's I will talk about that later on if somebody wants to know which books are there. They're all the very well-known history books. And then after that, this one happened during Abdurrahman Khan and also his son. The slavery time for Hazara people And about 9,000 women were sold from only Kabul based on the tax that they paid to the government of Afghanistan at that time. And all that 9,000 women were sold to be slaves anywhere in Afghanistan. It's only in Kabul, and then it could have been many to other big cities of Afghanistan that happened. So was going on, the raping, the killing, the atrocity of Hazara people were keep going on till his son died, Habibullah Khan, in 1919. So that's from 1891 to that point. There was no lack for Hazara people living in Afghanistan. And that caused lots of people to move from Afghanistan, escape from the killing to Quetta, Pakistan, and created another town in Pakistan or Iran, the Mashhad, that is a place that lots of Hazara lived there. They all escaped at that time from Afghanistan. And so there's lots of atrocity to talk about that, and then each one of them are really, really like unbelievable that a person can do it to the other person. And then after that, a little bit break to Amanullah Khan, he introduced a constitution that everybody should be equal. Hazara people supported him during the war, the civil war. But anyways, he got escaped from Afghanistan, and then unfortunately, a young guy, his name was Abdul Khaliq, and at a school, he killed Nadir Khan. And once he killed Nadir Khan, then his tribe was dominating Afghanistan for another 30 years. So Afghanistan was marginalizing and also discriminating at that area of the family, at that all the way to 1964. And then again, another break, and the people, the school door opened, the hospitals and all other during the mission of NATO in Afghanistan. There was a green light popped out, but didn't last too long, and the people got jealous because Hazara were very talented people. The kids started going to school. The kids starting and showing up, being in the offices just before they were not allowed to be anywhere in that kind of places. So and then they started suicide bombing inside the society of the Hazara gathering, anywhere from the mosque to the school, to the hospital, and also in the road. When the people were traveling from one place to the other place, they were taking off and looking if they are Hazara, they were killing those people. And also in, 1 second, I was probably talking too fast. In 1992, during civil war, again, another attack to Hazara people during the civil war in between different warlords. But the punishment got to the people of Hazara. The place called Afshar in Kabul, all the government and all his allied party attacked at that time. It's 1992. I do believe it was 11 and 12 of 1992.
Thank you, Mr.
My
Rajabi.
time is over.
Yes,
Okay.
but you will have more. I'm certain that you'll be able to answer or share more in the questions and answers. We're going to have ample time for that. Now we're going to continue on to the Canadian Hazara Humanitarian Services, and you have 5 minutes. I encourage you to time yourselves, but I will lean in when your 5 minutes is concluding. So please, from the Canadian Hazara Humanitarian Services for 5 minutes. Thank you.
On behalf of the Canadian Hazara Humanitarian Services, I would like to thank everyone who made this event possible to raise the voices of millions of Hazara victims that have been perished and the thousands that continue to suffer systemic persecution. Mr. Chair, I'm a witness and survivor of the unspoken August 1998 Hazara genocide. This is my personal history, and I'm hoping this can be a learning experience for our future generations. In the afternoon of July 31st of 1998, my fiancé and I, along with families and friends, were celebrating our engagement ceremony in the Arezzo Banquet Hall in Mazar-e-Sharif. Midway through our ceremony, only a few family members were left in the banquet hall. I asked my brother why the guests were leaving so early, to which he replied, "The Taliban have taken over the city of Sheboygan, 75 miles west of Mazar-e Sharif. The ceremony ended without the traditional rituals. A week later, when the Taliban invaded the city of Mazar-e Sharif, shooting on the Hazara people in the streets, farms, alleys, killing thousands because just they were Hazara. They started searching houses for Hazara. The Taliban knocked my door. I didn't open it and heard that someone said, "Nobody is in this house." The Taliban went to my next door neighbor. Each time they knocked on my door, I jumped over the fence to the next door neighbor. Finally, my neighbor forced me to leave their house. I headed towards my uncle's house, which was in a rural area of the city. On my way, I saw hundreds of mutilated, dead bodies of Hazaras on the roads and alleys. I was working as a medical officer for a leprosy control organization, also as a medical doctor at the city hospital. Eventually, I made my way to my workplace, the city hospital. I saw trucks with cargo containers full of Hazara people. I witnessed the Taliban brutal acting when they dragged a Hazara patient to the back of their pickup while the serum bag was still connected to his veins. Mr. Chair, I can talk for hours to end about all bloodshed I witnessed or about the indifference of non-Hazara civilians that were throwing stones at Hazaras to prove their loyalty and allegiance to the Taliban. Now, why it's important to recognize the Hazara genocide in 1891 to 1893? Because the perpetual persecution and systemic discrimination that Hazara have endured is the after effect of the 1891 to 1893 genocide committed by dictator Abdurrahman. The Hazaras have been considered as secondary citizens and have been refugees in their own homeland. They have been targeted in their mosques, gyms, schools, markets, and on roads and highways. The recognition of 1891 to 1893 Hazara genocide won't receive those that were brutally slaughtered, but it will help to change the socio-psychological view and belief towards the Hazaras. The recognition of Hazara genocide will not heal our grandparents' wounds, but it will ensure our grandchildren feel valued and to live with dignity. We humbly request this committee and through it, the Canadian Parliament to A, formally recognize the 1891 to 1893 ethnic cleansing perpetrated against the Hazaras as a genocide. B, to be designated September 25th as Hazara Genocide Memorial Day. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that statement. And in the remaining time, please, to your colleague for about a minute and a half.
Mr. Chair and honorable committee members, today I'm very grateful for your time and the opportunity to share my untold experiences as a survivor of many systemic attacks on my people. One day around noon, while I was in my classroom in Pakistan, the air darkened, the city was overtaken by an eerie silence. My school announced there was an attack on Hazaras in mosque. My heart was shaken and shattered. I was praying that the school let us go home and praying to find my family alive. When I got home, my mother was crying. My father wasn't home. We find out that 2 of our relatives died in that mosque attack. I ran to the street. Our neighbors were crying. One was slapping her face upon learning her husband had perished too. I decided to go and find my 2 little brothers. I ran to the hospital where injured Hazaras were taken to. I searched every bit to find my brothers, but couldn't find anyone. I was lost among the mutilated bloodied bodies. Every single innocent, lifeless face I saw that day remains with me till this day. The attacks on Hazaras continued in many places, at school buses, in the streets and workplace. The darkness, the hopelessness remain in place in that city. My only question was, what is our crime? Mr. Chair, I returned to Afghanistan in 2011 as an adult, where I experienced renewed mistreatment as a second-class citizen with my own homeland. There, as a student at the Faculty of Science, one day during the finals, the guard entered the classroom and started violently beating Hazara students with point of Kalashnikov for cheating. Hazara's boys in my class begged to have their pockets searched, but guards wouldn't listen. I was sweating, my paperwork got wet, and other students were falling from their chairs out of fear. The systemic attacks on my people and on my people had profoundly traumatic impact on my generations, deeply wounded my soul, those of our grandparents and many generations since the late 1800s genocide. Mr. Chair, my question was never answered by anyone. What is our crime to be perpetually condemned to such pain and suffering? But I hope this committee does not leave our peoples, the Hazaras, request who are looking at us to end this suffering inherited and passed on from generations to generations unanswered. Our future generations deserve to live a life free of oppression. Mr. Chair and honorable committee members, your decision to respond positively to the ask of Hazara Canadians for the recognition of our genocide is truly the only first step towards closure and healing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ahmadi. We're going to now continue to Mr. Karimi for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Zuberi, and on.
Mr. Karimi, we're having challenges
members
with
of the
interpretation.
and
Your
historic
connection is a little bit weak. I'm going to go now to Ms. Cherry Ovenda. Please pronounce your name for us also. And we'll let IT work with Mr. Karimi to fix that up. For 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it's Melissa Kirkiovenda, but it's no problem at all. So I'd like to talk a little bit and reiterate the devastation that the 1891 to 1893 campaigns by Abdur Rahman had on the Hazara society in Afghanistan. Now, my research in Afghanistan, which I've undertaken since 2009, focused on Hazara collective trauma and the Hazara community at large. But one of the things that I found was that at the center of this collective trauma was this event in 1891 and 1893 and the actions of Abdur Rahman. While there had been loss of Hazara land prior to that, and while of course we've heard many of the horrific things that have happened to Hazaras since then, this event set the stage for more than 100 years of Hazara persecution within Afghan society. Now, just really quickly, Abdur Rahman did carry out campaigns against other communities in Afghanistan, but what was particular against the Hazara community was that it really was done with an intent to target a specific ethnic group that had specific somatic or racial features, and that was a religious minority. And there was dehumanizing language, and there were efforts to mobilize not just the army, but the entire society. There were civilians that were brought in and were called upon to commit jihad against Hazaras and target them specifically. So this was a very specific event. It targeted Hazara culture as well. Hazara culture and social structure was almost completely destroyed. I don't want to take too much time, but I want to really reiterate several things that kind of point to this being a genocide. I mean, number one, this was a specific group. This was the targeting of a specific group, an ethnic group, and a religious group. And there is documentation of this. We see, of course, the killing of huge numbers of Hazaras, the displacement of huge numbers of Hazaras from their land, and the enslavement. I think we've already heard the number, more than 62%. This is pretty much the agreed upon number. We also saw, however, that there was conditions put in place to bring about the destruction of Hazaras after this. So we had Hazara land that was given out to those who assisted in these campaigns and to others as well. So Hazaras were removed from the land, and this was given to other populations in Afghanistan. We had incredibly high taxation rates put on Hazaras that made it nearly impossible for them to live. And of course, we had the enslavement of huge numbers of people. And this was also treated as kind of a spoils of war for those who took part in the campaign. I think it's important to underline that women, this has been brought up, but that women were forced into marriage and raped, both enslaved women and non-enslaved women. So, this could be also viewed in the context of genocide as an attempt to prevent the birth of Hazaras. And, again, all of this these events from 1891 to 1893 have set the stage, which have led to current Hazara vulnerability and the current risk that Hazaras face of genocide again in Afghanistan. We have that past history of that, and then we have that going forward. So I think it's very important that this time period, 1891, 1893, and Abdur Rahman's campaigns against Hazara be recognized as a genocide for all of these reasons. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kerr-Shiovenda, for that testimony. And we're going to try again with Mr. Karimi, please, for 5 minutes.
How about if I turn off my camera only, talk with audio?
We prefer that you keep on your camera. It's important for
Okay.
interpretation. So just go ahead, and if there's any challenges, I'll let you know. Please
Okay.
go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just to continue, I'm honored to be speaking with you about the social and historical aspects of the violence against the Hazara people. Wars, ethnic cleansing, enslavement, and land grab leave lasting legacies. In Afghanistan, the Hazaras have been the victims of all these forms of violence throughout modern history of the country. And that is why one cannot fully understand their current situation without paying attention to the historical roots of the Afghan ethnic conflicts. Despite all their sufferings, the Afghan state or even people rarely acknowledge what the Hazaras have gone through. In school books and other instruments of propagating official narratives, the Hazaras are either absent or misrepresented. Allow me to give you one example of this systematic silence. The Hazaras were enslaved in Afghanistan for centuries for being Shia Muslims and sold in bazaars across the region. This inhuman practice continued well into the 20th century. In 1924, finally the state abolished slavery. Despite this long history, there is no book or even an article in any language about the history of the Hazara slavery. When I say the Hazaras have rarely seen other people acknowledge their sufferings, I'm not exaggerating. This is why I especially appreciate the work this subcommittee is doing about the human rights of the Hazara people. This means a great deal to us. Afghanistan is a very diverse country with many ethnic groups, languages, and sects. In the West, this is not very well known. These diverse people, as you can imagine, were not always very good at getting along with each other. Until the late 19th century, each region of the country had its own states with kings and mirs. The weaker ones paid tribute to the stronger ones, and that's how they coexisted for centuries. This was, in fact, how political power was practiced, not only in Central Asia, but all over the world before the invention of the modern state in the 19th century that introduced novel concepts such as national borders and citizenship. In the 19th century, the British Empire invaded Afghanistan for a second time. They were worried about the Russian Empire conquering the territory that was long a buffer zone between the two adversaries. The occupation didn't go well, and they decided to withdraw their troops and instead help a local ruler conquer all the Confederation of Independent States and make one central state out of them. They picked Abdur Rahman, an Afghan, for the job and supported him with money and arms. The new emir was the head of a state that barely existed. In 1892, he declared the Hazaras as non-believers and asked the clergy to issue a fatwa of jihad against them. They did. The fatwa said every Muslim should kill Hazaras and take their properties and enslave their men and women. The emir reserved Hazara lands for his fellow Pashtuns only. This large-scale military mobilization united the diverse ethnic groups behind one cause and solidified the position of the emir as a national leader. I would argue that the genocide of the Hazaras gave birth to Afghanistan as a nation state. This event is the origin story of Afghanistan. The ongoing targeted attacks on Hazaras are a continuation of that larger history of racial, ethnic, and religious war on these people. At least two legal scholars, Mehdi Hakimi and Gregory Stanton, have argued that the targeted attacks on Hazaras in the past 2 decades meet the definition of the crime of genocide. This is not hard to understand. The UN figures show between 2017 and 2021, extremist groups attacked Hazara civilian targets 67 times, resulting in 2,458 civilian casualties, 756 killed, and 1,702 injured. This happened only in 4 years. They targeted Hazara schools, hospitals, mosques, and peaceful demonstrations. Hazaras are not safe anywhere in Afghanistan. In conclusion, allow me to acknowledge that Afghanistan under the Taliban rule is a no man's land. The Taliban have built a state of terror. In particular, they have denied women of all their basic rights. The gender aspect of the current human rights violation in Afghanistan is fairly known. The ethnic aspect, however, not so much. Almost everyone is suffering in Afghanistan, but it is only the Hazaras who are being targeted for their race and ethnicity. This is an important distinction that requires acknowledgement by those involved in the affairs of Afghanistan, such as the UN agencies, aid organizations, and diplomatic missions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Karimi. And now we're going to go on with our questions from members of different parties, starting off with Mr. Versen from the Conservative Party.
Well, thank you,
For 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our honorable witnesses for being here. Mr. Rajabi, if I could start with you, could you just explain perhaps a little bit more about the more recent history of the Hazara people, say in the last 10 years? How has that looked basically since 2001 onward, and then in the last year and a half, essentially? Mike, please.
Is that clear? Can you hear?
Yeah.
Yeah, so after the last 10 years, start from the very beginning, like 2022, there was many explosion that one of them were very tragic, or all of them were tragic. Three most events that I can mention it right now. The gunman came to the door of the school, killed the security guy at the door, and then entered to the classroom and shooting around every single student that they are the age of between 15 to 19 years old kids getting to prepare to go for Concord exam to university. So, and then after he shoot that, and then he exploded himself inside. And basically, they blamed the ISIS-K of Afghanistan at that event. And after that, there was another event that they attacked in the women's hospital and killed the newborn babies, killed the women during the deliveries, and then killed all the other women right there at that event also. So there was another one that killed the girls' school getting prepared to the university to go for exam at that Concord again, and then another explosion happened inside of that girls and killed all the girls that wanted to go to university and for lots of hope for the future. So the situation for Hazara people have never been safe in Afghanistan. And anywhere, as I said, just mentioned just before a few minutes ago, that anywhere, as I said, when they started popping out and being educated people, before they didn't want Hazara to be sitting beside the other people right there at the office. But now they popped out to go as an educated person and being a minister, being a general, or being a high-rank officer. That one was not accepted by those for radical terrorist groups, and they started exploding themselves, killing themselves anywhere on the road, on the highway, in the mosque, in the school, at the university. There is a lots of evidence that's a lots of happened that there is registered by the people of Afghanistan, by historians, that we can bring it up. Thank you.
Melissa, you mentioned that you had been there 2011. Was there? I imagine there's been a significant shift in the last couple of years, but 2011 was a time of relative peace in Afghanistan. Can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
Thank you,
Yeah,
Mr.
absolutely.
Chair. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I heard.
Which
I was
of us
asking
was?
Melissa.
Oh, okay. Sorry for that. Yeah, I was there. 2012 and 2013 was the main bulk of my research, but I started going in 2009, and it was relatively peaceful when I was there, but there has been a steady decrease in security for Hazaras over that time, which Mr. Rajavi kind of touched on. So, we had probably the first really big mosque bombing targeting Hazaras was in 2011, I believe. And for a few years, it seemed like maybe that was sort of an isolated incident, but there was kind of concurrently an increase of targeted attacks of Hazaras traveling by road, particularly between cities and between districts. So when people would be in urban centers, they might be relatively safe, but then when they would be traveling through areas, particularly where Taliban had more control, they were potentially removed from the transportation, whether it was private or public transportation, if they were identified as Hazaras, taken out, kidnapped, and often killed, including children. A number of children. One very famous incident involved a 9-year-old girl. So this kind of started picking up. And then I think around 2016, we saw a really big uptick in kind of mass killings, suicide bombings, and other types of bombings, and in some cases, shootings and attacks, not only limited to mosques, but limited to civilian, and this Mr. Rajabi got into as well, right? Civilian targets, soft targets, like schools, educational centers, sports centers, the maternity hospital, which I like to emphasize. I think that had incredible symbolic significance if we're talking about genocide. If we think about killing mothers who were in the act of giving birth, and newborn babies who were shot and killed just face to face. I mean, it's quite incredible to think of, and I think really can make us see what the intent was of those carrying out those attacks. And it was just kind of a steady increase from then, really until the Taliban took control. The Taliban in control, we had a kind of a moment of instability. Now there's a different type of danger, I think, right? Because, there have been a number of large-scale attacks that have happened. But I think more importantly is, the fact that everything has been turned on its head. So, whereas, it's the people who, we've heard the testimony about what happened in Mazar-e-Sharif, right? People who very clearly wanted to exterminate Hazaras now hold the reins of power. For the most part, they haven't acted yet, and they're kind of, displacing blame for the attacks that have happened on ISIS and on other groups. But we also see kind of an erosion of Hazara security in other areas, with people being removed from land that was historically theirs, displaced in rural areas and also in the cities. Old disputes that date back decades and sometimes even 100 years concerning land and, Hazara land that was given out even back in the 1800s to other ethnic groups, and that Hazaras later managed to reclaim, now being claimed back by those groups. And the Taliban almost always falls on the group that is not Hazaras. So, and there's no, of course, Hazara representation in the Taliban government to kind of counter this. Yes, the situation is getting quite bad.
Ms. Kerr, Ms. Kerr, thank you for that. We're going to continue on to our next questioner, Ms. Van den Belt from the Liberal Party, for 7 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for your very honest and personal testimony. I know that's not easy to do, and I can assure you that it is making a difference, and you are being heard. I know that, many of you have talked about the historic situation and the genocide that has happened to the Hazaras in previous centuries. And I understand that acknowledgement of that is something that could be a deterrent in terms of this happening again. This committee has often ended up having to do hearings after genocides have happened. And I think that right now we are in a situation where we are perhaps seeing the beginning of another genocide, and perhaps as legislators, people with power, we may be able to do something to stop it. And so this is incredibly important testimony. I would like to focus on what's happening right now today. And I know that Mr. Karimi, you mentioned, and I think Ms. Chiovenda, both of you talked about what is happening right now under the Taliban. I think you said, what happens when the people who are perpetrating the violence are now in power. But also, if I could start with you, Mr. Karimi, about you said that there have been, in the last, say, decade, hundreds killed and thousands injured already. So if you could all talk a little bit about the current situation today and in the last few years, and what your fears are in terms of where this is heading, and then tell us what we can do as legislators to try to make sure this does not happen. So I'll start with you, Mr. Karimi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I think one way to understand the current situation of the Hazaras under the Taliban is to see how in the South Asian region in general, Islamic extremism operate. The hatred towards religious minorities like the Shias, Ahmadis, Hindus, and other minorities who live in Afghanistan, Pakistan. It is one of the main driving force for recruitment of this extremist group. You can't go around and say another Sunni, oh, let's join our party, our group, let's kill our fellow Sunnis. It's not gonna work. So all these madrasas in Afghanistan and Pakistan, they're recruiting people because they say that there is a jihad going on. There are non-Muslims like the Hazaras, and if you kill them, you will go to heaven. You will go to paradise. A lot of these young suicidal men join the Taliban, ISIS because of that. The Taliban is right now, they act like a state, and several countries, they treat them like a state. But what kind of a state is that? That they have a regiment of social bombers, suicidal attackers inside their army. Like any normal army would not have a suicide squad, but they have. In one of the groups, there are 1,500 men ready to commit suicide. So these are not states, these are not governments, these are terror organizations, and they operate like terror organizations. And one way they operate, one way they recruit people, fundraise, is through propagating hate. In Pakistan, if you walk into any bookstore, you can pick books about why Shias are non-Muslim, Rafidi. The word is Rafidi. In these madrasa schools, there are textbooks that test the students on this kind of hate. So there is a systematic hatred against religious minorities.
So,
and
Mr.
the Hazara.
I'm really sorry, but I also want to hear from some of the other witnesses, and I only have about a minute and a half left. And I know, Ms. Ahmadi, you haven't said very much, so if I could perhaps have you answer that, and if there's time, Ms. Chiovenda as well. Ms. Ahmadi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time. Currently, situation of Hazaras are really critical in Afghanistan, especially with the extremist group of Taliban coming in power. I'm extremely worried about the Hazaras right now at the moment, especially women and young women. Before, even when there was a government that was supported through the international community, Hazaras were not safe to travel between smaller cities. They were targeted everywhere. But now that the Taliban, the extremists, are in power, we are more at risk of another genocide. Even when I was in Kabul University, I experienced so many challenges and my time as a Hazara. Even people in the university was telling me to hide your identity because your eyebrows are a little bit darker. But how could I hide my facial feature? How could I hide my accent, the way that I was speaking? I was brought up the way in my family. It was hurting me deeply. And I also witnessed that the Hazara students' paper were by the professors in the university. They were telling that this student were not present in the university during the exam. How can you do that? Because they were students. There are so many stories that I can tell you as a person, as an individual, as a Hazara. I know this is not my story, and there has been thousands and thousands that can tell you. This situation really worries me under the Taliban government, that what will happen to our women again, to our young generation again, to go around, to live in that city under the extremist in power, and to our men work outside. We are very easily recognizable through our facial features, very easily. And we have witnessed many, many attacks in the past 10 years that we are talking about. That was the most stable time in Afghanistan. But I'm really, really worried. And I hope that the committee today hear us and do something for us, because the wound and the suffering is unbearable for us. Even being in Canada, we are in between. We are suffering.
Thank you, Ms. Ahmadi.
So much, thank you.
We are going to continue on to Monsieur Brunel Duceppe.
Mr. Brunel Duceppe, 7 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. I hope you haven't forgotten my name, and we're working here as a group today, as a team. The committee is very interested in follow-up. We only have one session, and so we have to concentrate on what's happening now. You've referred to the genocide in the late 1800s and the events at that time, and that's my question is simple. It's essential for what's going to happen now and for our report. Mr. Mohabi, have the Hazara been subject to genocide in 91-93?
I'm so sorry. I missed the first part of the question. If you can repeat it.
It's just to tell me, were the Hazara subject to genocide in 1891-93?
Actually, this is a historical issue, but as a witness that I witness what is going on Hazara people right now or in the late 21st century is because of the after effect or the consequence of the fitwa or jihad that was given by King Abdurrahman in 1891 to 1893, that they consider the Hazara people as infidels, and they also enslaved the Hazara people and forced them to be displaced, and their lands were given to non-Hazara people, as some of the witnesses also mentioned about what happened in Uruzgan province, same in Kandahar, that was originally was was the land of Hazara people, and they were all forced to flee the country, and most of them went to Pakistan and Iran, but some they were not able to cross the border towards a northern part, which was the Russian countries or at that time. But unfortunately, those who were inside of the country were all subject because of being the fatwa or jihad that was decreed by the King Abdurrahman, and mainly that happened because of the Hazara people belonging to a minority sect of Muslim, which is Shia, and that was a very easy tool for the King Abdurrahman to subject the Hazara people as infidels and subject to genocide as infidels. Unfortunately, that has been given a mentality among the Afghan society that the secondary citizens, they don't have the rights to live in the country, and they were always been targeted. Even psychologically, they were all been targeted, which give the society, and as some other witnesses also mentioned, the recruitment pathway in the Southern Asia for the extremists was much easier to go and kill Hazara people as infidels. And that's what made the Hazara people a soft target during the current situation, is based on the fatwa and jihad that was given by the King Abdurrahman.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much. Ms. Ahmadi, can you tell us how important it is that Canada recognize that genocide and call it a genocide in 1891-93?
Mr. Chair, thank you so much for your questions. It will definitely, it won't heal all our wounds that we have suffered, but it definitely brings a lot of change if Canada recognized the genocide of Hazaras in Afghanistan. It will give, once the genocide is recognized, so it will give a peace of mind that our voices are heard. Because when I was a young little girl, when the attacks were happening, even the news, everything was misinterpreted around the world. The numbers of people who were killed was misrepresented to the world, the number of injured people. So this will definitely bring a bit of like awareness to the world. If you recognize it, it brings awareness, it brings awareness to the world, and it may change a lot of laws, how to treat even the refugees, newcomers to the country. So this is the most important thing, because when our genocide is not recognized, first of all, when we are a refugee in another country, we have to be firstly as a Hazara treated as a refugee. We don't need as another story, individual story. Once we are Hazara, we are refugee, because we are targeted systematically in Afghanistan and in the neighborhood countries.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Kerkiam van.
Ms. Chovenda, how certain are we that in 1891-93, what happened could be considered as genocide?
So I'm completely certain that this was a genocide. It really hits, I think, all the marks for the international legal definition of genocide. I mean, you have a group that is clearly an ethnic and religious group, and there are documents from the time period that show that they were targeted from this period. The call for jihad against Hazaras because they were Shias. So that's one thing. You have the destruction of whole or part of the group. I mean, absolutely, this is what happened. If you think about what it means, more than 60% of the population being killed, enslaved, or displaced, that absolutely checks that box. If you think about, the conditions were made so that this group could not survive, and you think about the subsequent giving away of Hazara land, displacement of Hazaras, enslavement of Hazaras, heavy taxation. I mean, when I talk about taxation, it seems like something not very important, but I'm talking about a level of taxes specific to Hazaras that made survival impossible. And then, you know, again, I keep coming back to the women issue and the issue of rape and forced marriages. This isn't something that's very much talked about for cultural reasons, but this was also a huge problem, and the silence that kind of surrounds this is important. And we're only just now starting to see talk about what it meant that so many of the enslaved Hazaras that were, you know, given away as spoils of war were women and were raped and were pushed into forced marriages. I mean, this also, you know, constituted an effort to destroy an ethnic and a religious group. So, like I said, I have no doubt in my mind that what happened in 1891, 1893 fulfills the definition of genocide. No doubt whatsoever.
Merci beaucoup. Ah, c'est fini. Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much. Is that all the time I have?
Oui.
C'est terminé, mais
Yes. Chair, just to tell you that I can't see you on the Zoom call, so I don't know how much time we have left when we take the floor. And it would be helpful if we could see you on our screens when we're on Zoom. Okay. We'll try to do this in the future rounds. You're right. So.
give a signal, also a hand signal for 30 seconds, just like my fist up like this, 30 seconds. Mr. Cannings, welcome to the committee, and for 7 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for convening this meeting on the situation of Hazaras in Afghanistan, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today to provide their testimony. And I'm subbing in for my colleague, MP Heather McPherson, who's been engaging with the Hazara community regularly, especially after the fall of Kabul in August 2021. But before I begin my questioning, I'd like to read into the record a motion which was circulated by Heather McPherson in regards to a study she would like the committee to conduct in the fall. And I'm just... Well,
we don't ambush
can I
each other
just
in this committee.
put it on notice?
We don't do motions or votes in this committee. It's consensus. There's no motions. It's a consensus committee.
Okay, sorry, I was just...
It's your right to read in, but it is not the normal culture of this committee to do that, but it's your right to read it in.
Well, I'll read it in anyways, just to put it on the record. It's not to do with this study. It's asking for another one, that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the subcommittee conduct a study of the meaningful implementation of the Voices at Risk, Canada's guideline on supporting human rights defenders, and the human rights impacts of Canada's diplomatic support for Canadian extractive industries abroad, that the subcommittee conducts no fewer than 2 meetings on this topic, and that the subcommittee reports its findings to the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. So,
Mr. Chair, I do find this rather inappropriate, given the fact that he's not a regular member of this committee, and the fact that this committee is a subcommittee. It's a very special committee. Running roughshod over our normal processes is incredibly inappropriate. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Verson, normally I would recognize you before you speak, but I guess we'll accept that. And you are a vice chair also, and it's his right to read it in, but it is very much counter to the culture of this committee. We have yet have seen that in the last several months. So let us continue in the remaining time, and less than already 2.5 minutes have passed.
that's fine, and I apologize if I didn't feel I was running roughshod over anything. I just wanted to put that on the record. I was asked to by Ms. McPherson. So I will continue now with, I would like to direct my questions to the Canadian Hazara Humanitarian Services, and Ms. Ahmadi in particular. First, just could you speak to the experiences of the Hazara community right now in Afghanistan, especially to the experience of women and girls particularly following the Taliban takeover in 2021. What challenges are Hazara women and girls faced with?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your question. It's a very important question that you asked me regarding the women of Hazaras in Afghanistan at the moment. Hazaras girls, like every other girls, they're right now bounded to their homes. They cannot go anywhere. But specifically for Hazara girls, it's like very harder to go. They're at risk of being kidnapped and raped for their facial features and the way they're dressing. And the way they're presenting themselves in the society. So some examples that I can give you when the Taliban took power in Afghanistan, a lot of these girls and women and families, they tried to escape the border to Pakistan. So when they were in the border in Pakistan, I've been like directly in contact with them. We were getting emails and we were trying to help these people to evacuate them from the border. But unfortunately on the border, the witnesses were telling me that, the Taliban were keeping the Hazara women and Hazara people on the border, not allowing them to cross the border, or even when they were wearing burqas, if they had a child that was looking, had the facial features like Hazaras, they were telling in Pashto language, "Da Hazara guy," that means that's Hazara, stop them. So they were not able to escape the country. They were like remained inside the country, which is with this woman and the women who were more at risk during this time, who were escaping the country, if they're easily recognizable by Taliban, it's really hard to even save those women at high risk. And my fear at the moment is that the Hazara women, during this time that the extremists are in power, once they started, they're right now they're not doing a lot of stuff in the country because they're waiting for the international community to recognize them as a government. But my fear is like if they are recognized once, they will start, attacking on Hazaras, and very easily they can, attack on women and kidnap women, rape them. This is my very big fear at the moment in Afghanistan, inside Afghanistan, for Hazara women.
And how much? 2 minutes? 1 minute? Okay, I would just like to continue with the Canadian Hazara Humanitarian Services, either Ms. Ahmadi or Mr. Mohebi. If you could just please speak to how Canada can better support the Hazara community and the work of organizations like yours to do the good work that you do.
Thank you so much. I think the least the Canadian government and parliament can do at this moment is to recognize the genocide of Hazaras that Hazara community faced in 1891 to 1893. That is the first step that will be acknowledged, hopefully globally, which will change the socio-psychological approach towards the Hazara people, both in Afghan society as well as global international community, because that can bring the concerns and awareness to international society, and we are hopeful that will bring a safeguards towards the Hazara protection, which are suffering right now based on that genocide, which right now in Behsud province and Ghazni province, Behsud district of Wardak province and the Ghazni, that the Kuchis, that based on Abdurrahman's order, they lost their lands. Now the Kuchis are invading there every year during the springtime and killing hundreds and displacing thousands of Hazara people with no reason, just because Abdurrahman said that these lands does not belong to Hazaras, but belongs to Kuchis or non-Hazara, which are mainly Pashtuns. So if that genocide is recognized, I'm hopeful that there will be a layer of safeguard for the Hazara people that can be identified based their facial features. As I said that I was a witness of the August 1998, and some Uzbek people were killed just because they look like Hazaras. So Hazaras can be killed based on their small eyes and small nose, And I hope that this recognition, the recognition of genocide would stop this atrocity in the future, and our children or grandchildren can live with dignity and be felt valued.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mohibi. We're now going to continue on to our second round, and the order is a bit different than what we started in the first round. So now, Mr. Assassi, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Allow me to also thank all the witnesses for their exceptional testimony. No doubt it is difficult, but they have done a superb job in terms of advocacy. So the first question I had is, it's very, very obvious to all of us that the Hazara community in Afghanistan has faced decades upon decades of discrimination and hardship, and it obviously started in the late 19th century. The question I had is, I have read reports which do indicate that the Hazara community, despite all this hardship, has demonstrated incredible resilience. And there is an emphasis on education within the Hazara community, as well as very progressive views insofar as the role of women is concerned. I was wondering if anyone could speak to these two factors and how the Hazara community has proven so resilient and continues to invest in human capital. Did any one of the witnesses want to take it? Maybe
I can if my video works. Thank you very much for the question. In Afghanistan, it has been a very known fact that the Hazara women, they are better treated by their male family members than other ethnic groups. In 1830s, apologies for going back into 19th century again, the first American. Yeah.
But I just wanted to keep the focus on the modern era. And if there are any particular studies that members of the committee should be privy to and have the opportunity to look at, just so we can highlight these two factors.
Yeah, so the Hazaras have, because of this more egalitarian attitude toward women, they allow girls go to school. They allow the female members of family to go outside and work. In Ghazni province, in one district, there are more girls high schoolers than the entire province of Helmand. That is a Pashtun resident province. So it is a source of resentment also for these terrorist groups that organize attacks. One reason that we continuously see attacks on educational institutions, Hazara parents send their,
Yes, I think we could recognize that fact, but if you could possibly, Professor Karimi, provide us with a couple of articles which do talk about how the Hazara community does focus on education and does have a more progressive view of the role of women, that I think that would hugely be helpful when we prepare our report for this committee. The second question I had, and this came up in testimony, and I can't quite recall who it was. It may have been Ms. Melissa Kerr. There was talk about the madrasas in Afghanistan. Who is funding those madrasas? Is it foreign governments that are funding those educational institutions that have terrible perspectives on the Hazara? Who is funding those madrasas in Afghanistan? Is there anyone, because it did come up in testimony?
I think
Ms. Kerr?
So I wasn't the one who mentioned the madrasas.
Someone did. I wasn't quite sure. My apologies for that.
I apologize. Yeah, no, I'm not sure who it was. It wasn't me, but I mean, I think there is a not a long history, but in the relatively recent history. We do know there has been a lot of foreign influence of madrasas from the Gulf region where I am right now. But anyways, right. So I think that there has been evidence of that. And there is a pretty strong influence from Pakistan. Of course, I'm not sure if that's the case for funding. I'm not sure if it's so much funding as much as more ideological and intellectual influence, and then the movement of people that are coming back and forth from these kind of very extremist madrasas that have come up in Pakistan that I believe have also been funded in the past from other parts of the world. So that's my understanding. I don't know about the current situation right now.
Thank you, Ms. Kerr and Mr. Assassi. We're going to thank you for that round of questioning. We're going to continue on to Mr. Abultaya for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks for the witnesses. I would like to direct my questions to Mr. Karimi, and if I may find another member to weigh on my questions, then we'll go from there. In order to establish, full understanding of where we go from here, the history of the Hazara community goes back probably hundreds of years. The latest we have is since the 18th century. What we read and understood that what the community's been going through is nothing but a playbook in the history in the recent history and some of the past over what happened to the minorities in many regions of the world. Iraq is an example. What happened, some of the, against the Christian communities and other minorities in Iraq is the most recent, and what's happening in Afghanistan. The one thing that begs the question over this: where is the leadership of the community? A community of almost 10 million people recognized in the world, as we see the latest number. Where is the leadership, and who's speaking on behalf of the community?
Thank you very much. The Hazaras are very diverse. They are the most diverse ethnic group in Afghanistan. They are Shias, they are Sunnis, they are Ismailis, and recently there are new Christian converts. And because of this diversity, there is no one single establishment that would be regarded as a leadership. For example, one single political party. There are several, and they have different political tendencies. And that has been a weak point for the Hazaras, that they don't have one single institution to speak for them, both inside Afghanistan and outside Afghanistan. And it is mostly ad hoc community efforts, like the group you see today here, that we organized on our own. We just came here just to get somebody to listen to us. So that has been one reason that the Hazara story is not that well known. When the genocide happened, the Armenian genocide almost happened at the same time, but Armenian genocide is better known because of the sustained effort by Armenian community in the West and also in Armenia, but not by the Hazaras. And the number two reason is that the British Empire was complicit directly in the genocide of the Hazaras, because they wanted to, they were very famously Russophobes. They want to keep away the Russians, and they didn't care much about the cost, the human cost. So one reason, for example, in the UK, the politicians and members of parliament shy away from the question of genocide is that they don't want to acknowledge their own role in the violence against the Hazaras. So these have been part of the reasons that the Hazaras have failed so far in raising their voice on the international stage and attracting attention.
Mr. Karimi, thank you. The next question is, seems like what we heard from all witnesses, that the genocide call could be around the fact that this community is Shia community from the Ithna Ashari, which is the one believe in the 12th Imam. But the community is diverse, and I'm trying to understand one thing, and you please help me to do so. Isn't that the atrocity and the persecution against the community, is it beyond that being Shia? Could be because of the race, because, I mean, do we call Hazari as a Shia? And we know that it's a mix of Mughals, and they were named Hazari because it means Hazar in Persia mean 1,000, the 1,000 soldiers that joined Genghis Khan at some point of history. So help me just to round this a little bit, and seems like, as I said, the emphasis of all witnesses is that the genocide is just because they are Shia and they are different sect than the Sunnis under Islam.
Was that question directed?
The question is, could it be the race other than the religious sect?
It definitely was the race, because in Afghanistan, religion has always been used as a weapon. It has been weaponized to mobilize people, but the purpose has always been racial, because this race and ethnicity conflict have been the key foundation for all the wars in that country. And some of the issues that you mentioned have been used against the Hazaras, like they are Mongols, they're not from this country. That is not entirely correct. Hazaras are mostly a Turkic people. Central Asia is a collection of Turkic people with some Persian and some Arabs even. But race has been the driving force behind the violence.
Merci.
But religion for mobilization.
Round, thank you.
Thank you. And now, maintenant, on a...
And now, Mr. Brunel Youssef, 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. And I think we've shown that there was a genocide in 1891-93, but I was listening to you, Mr. Mohabi, and Madame Ahmadi. You have experienced yourself persecution, and it is about 10 years before your personal experiences. And I think this is another type of proof that the Hazara have always suffered these kinds of persecutions. Am I right in that, Ms. Ahmadi, perhaps first?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely, because when, as myself as a Hazara, I've been always treated differently, and it's very obvious. You can feel it, you can see it, you can hear it. My work at the beginning, when the Taliban fell and the newcomers came in Canada from Afghanistan, I was on the hotel site helping these newcomers. So the incident happened in Canada, inside Canada. The Pashtun people, they were knocking on Hazaras' doors in hotels, knocking in their doors and telling them, be thankful that you're in Canada. If you were not in Canada, I would diminish your race, totally like Abdul Rahman Khan. We had this meeting with the Costi. We emailed the immigration as well. It was heartbreaking to hear this in the country like Canada from another ethnicity warning our Hazara people. Very easily recognizable. We are very easily, if we stand among other ethnicities in Afghanistan, we have this Asian facial feature. No matter what religion we are, if we are Hazara, it's in our face. No one can hide it. It has existed.
Thank you. And it's very important what you've said, and we'll put this in our report. And if you live that in Canada, I can imagine what happens in Afghanistan. Mr. Mohabi, perhaps you could add something?
For sure, the atrocity that Hazara community is suffering has been for centuries. Everybody knows about that, and as I myself talked earlier, that is the outcome or the consequence of the genocide that happened in the 19th century, and that gives a socio-psychological view to the society, the non-Hazara society, that always Hazara are secondary citizens, and they are treating them as secondary citizens, and unfortunately, there was no voice and there was no safeguard for the Hazara community. So it was very easy to target the Hazara people, both the terrorists and also the civilians. As I mentioned earlier in my testimony, that during the August 1998, even the civilians, non-Hazara civilians, were throwing stones on Hazaras on the day that when the Taliban took the control of Mazar-e-Sharif. It was just to give or prove their loyalty towards the Taliban. And that is just coming off the that fatwa, unfortunately, because we were considered infidels, and they were even the civilian society were treating Hazara people in a way that with the punishment of Hazara people, they are receiving a reward. And that is the most painful for the Hazara communities. And recently, right now,
Excusez-moi parce que...
Sorry, because I don't have much time. I just want to. You've reminded me of a question for Mr. Mohabi. If the Canadian government recognizes the genocide, and we put this in our report at the international level, you talked about the international level. To what extent could that become an example for other parliaments across the world? Whether it be in Europe, Latin America? Do you think that this would send a message to other governments and parliaments?
Definitely.
In 30 seconds.
Canadian government and parliament has been the leader of democracy in the world. And I'm quite sure that if this initiative is taken by the government of Canada and Parliament of Canada, it will bring an awareness in the global and international level that will focus on what is happening and what is going on Hazara community. And I'm hopeful that it will bring an international awareness that all over the globe, the international community will try to recognize the genocide of Hazara people. So let's, as a leader of democracy.
Thank you. And now we'll continue with our next round. Mr. Cannings, for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to turn to Ms. Kyr-Kiavenda to talk about refugees for the moment. And the Immigration Committee in April of last year issued a press release calling for the government to implement special immigration measures like those enacted for Ukrainians fleeing Putin's illegal war, for other regions of the world facing humanitarian crises, such as Afghanistan. And do you agree with such a measure, and what impact would or could this have in the short and long term, especially for, say, the Hazara community?
Yeah, I absolutely would agree with a measure such as that. I mean, I think for those of us who I mean, I did research in Afghanistan, but also with Afghan refugees, and you know, I think we look to the world's reaction to the war in Ukraine and the welcoming of Ukrainian refugees as kind of the model that should have been applied to conflicts all over the world and to people who were vulnerable or facing persecution or facing genocide all over the world. And so I think something like that would be incredibly important. And if there was, you know, some acknowledgement within that of the particularly vulnerable status that Hazaras do have in Afghanistan. And if I might just briefly say in Pakistan as well, because, you know, we're focusing on Afghanistan, but I think it's also important to mention that Hazaras in Pakistan are kind of every bit as much in danger in Pakistan due to the particular social and political situation there as well. That would provide much needed protection to an incredibly vulnerable group of people. So yes, absolutely. I think that would be very important movement to see.
And I just wonder if you could perhaps go on and expand on that and share, some of your findings from your research on refugees as it relates to the Hazara community that you think it would be important for us to know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I could, echo some of what Ms. Ahmadi said. We do see these sorts of tensions between ethnicities and whatnot. But I think maybe what is more important to focus on is, I have written a lot of country expert reports for Afghanistan, and particularly for Hazaras who are seeking asylum. Most recently, I've done most of them in the United States, but in past years, I've done a large number for various European countries, Australia as well. And, there's kind of almost a, how would I say, a complete lack of understanding of the particular, again, vulnerable situation that many categories of people in Afghanistan face. Everybody knows that women are vulnerable, but then, beyond that, there's not really understanding. And I think, the problem of Hazaras as an ethnic and religious minority is kind of first and foremost there. And so some of the interactions that I've had, particularly in Europe, because I tend to kind of work much more closely with European immigration officials, as to what's going on, can be quite shocking. So again, something to reference to show that there has been this recognition would be incredibly important. And I think this might bring us back, not just to an acknowledgement of, the necessity to recognize Hazaras as people in need of protection when it comes to seeking refugee status or asylum, but also the recognition of genocide, I think, would be incredibly important here. And, that's why I'm so hopeful that, this might come out of Canada, because being able to point to, a large, very important country like Canada having recognized this and made this decision anytime you're discussing these sorts of issues or writing these sorts of reports, not just within the context of Canada and Canada refugee issues, but United States, Europe, Australia, everywhere else.
Thank you, Ms. Kerr.
It would have a huge impact.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Mr. Cannings. We're now going to continue on to a quick 2-minute round, starting with Mr. Baker.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to thank all the witnesses for being here. And I'd like to start by asking, there are people perhaps watching at home, some of my constituents perhaps watching this hearing, or who will read about this hearing, who aren't familiar, who are learning a lot through your testimony, and I'm learning a lot through your testimony. And I think one of the things that's been called for is the recognition of the genocide. And I wonder if one of you, and maybe I'll turn this to anybody who wants to answer it, is what would you say to my constituents as to why it's important that we do this? Why is it important that Canada do this? I only have a couple minutes, so I probably have one person answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the most important thing that it brings up is the awareness that what happened in the past, and also it will add a layer of protection for not happening in the future. As you know, that Hazara people are suffering for centuries, and that is still going on. And there is also no hope that it can be stopped soon in the future. Right now, as mentioned earlier, in some areas of Afghanistan, Hazaras are displaced, and forcefully they were displaced by Kuchis, that they own the lands of Hazaras during that genocide that happens. And that nobody knows about that unless those who are connected with the Hazara people living in Afghanistan. So that is an ongoing issue. And the main thing that will bring is another layer of safeguard for the Hazara community to be protected and do not be targeted. And also it change the social psychological view and belief of the society to not treat Hazara people as a secondary citizens, and also treated equally as same as other citizens. Thank you.
And
thank you very much.
We'll continue. Thank you, Mr. Baker, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the committee. Now we'll continue on with Mr. Abultaya for 2 minutes, please.
Yes, the question to Professor Shiovanda. Again, I'm trying to nail this in the point that, or at a point where, is it with the fatwas under King Abdurrahman Khan regarding attacking or the Hazari community because they are Shia, and even Taliban probably have done the same. Why can't we say that this is an attack based on race, more or less, because the DNA tells us, I mean, just mixed between Mongolian and Turkic. So is that a way would you go to explain why the community is, because it's a recognition of the facial recognition at least, that tells us otherwise?
Didn't mention unmute. So I think in the case of Hazaras in Afghanistan, we have a situation where religion and race, ethnicity are like inextricably entwined, right? And so when you see somebody with facial features that appear to be Hazara, there's this assumption that that person is Shia, whether or not that is the case, right? We know there are Sunni Hazaras, we know there are Christian Hazaras, we know there are others. We also know that there are other Shia Afghans who have not experienced what Hazaras have experienced. And part of the reason, not the only reason, but part of the reason is they're more able to blend into their communities. I mean, I've known Shia Pashtuns for years, and I only, after years understood that they were Shia when they told me this, right? So, Hazaras are kind of at this, juncture that causes this real particular vulnerability. And so in the time of Abdurrahman, right, when he issued these fatwas and called upon this, I mean, there is evidence that, also, he kind of used these religious divisions to his benefit, but in the end, really attacked the entire Hazara community, right? So initially he divided the Shias from the Sunnis, kind of got the Sunnis on his side, but by the end of these 2 years of wars, right, he was clamping down, attacking, killing, enslaving, all of the Hazara community. So I think, we have to see them as linked.
Thanks, Ms. Shiovanda. That was helpful. And now we'll continue to the next round. Mr. Brunel Duceppe for...
Mr. Brunel Duceppe, 2 minutes. Thank you very much. 2 minutes isn't very much. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here and what we're doing here. I think it's really important, and we're going to lay the first stone for the rest of the Hazara people, and it's essential for the future of the Hazara people. And I would like to give the last word to Ms. Ahmadi, and Mr. Ahmadi, if you have any last word.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. My last word would be to the chair, to this committee, that please consider to acknowledge the genocide of Hazara people. It will change the the future it will change the situation in Afghanistan. It will change the situation of Hazaras outside of Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in neighboring countries. It will also it will also change the perspectives of other world leaders in recognition of the Hazaras genocide around the globe. If Canada recognizes this, because we believe in the democracy in Canada, we believe in leaders in Canada that will hear our voices today. You heard my voice, my story, my struggle, and you also see me, my resilience, and it's not only me, all our community. We are resilient. We are ready to bring change to our community, to the world. Just please end this suffering. Take us the initial step to bring the change to our future generation.
Thank you, Ms. Ahmadi. That was very eloquently said and put. We're going to continue now to our last round with Mr. Cannings, please, for 2 minutes.
Thank you. And I'll just turn to Mr. Rajabi and allow you 2 minutes to tell this committee what you think that Canada and the Canadian government could do to help the Hazara community around the world, but especially in Afghanistan.
Thank you. As we all know and we believe that Canada is one of the leaders of the democracy in the world and the leader of the human right in the world. So, and as we talk in this session all together, that we all believe that the genocide happened to Afghanistan in the past, and discrimination against the Hazara and explosion about the Hazara society is still continuously going on. It is very good. It's going to be very nice if they're very good, and also I will say it's going to be Canada's duty to recognize Hazara's genocide in the past, and also recognize that imminent threat against the Hazara is still continuing, and it's possibly happen again. So that's what I would have asked, that Canada government or Canada Parliament will recognize genocide of Hazara. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to thank all the witnesses on behalf of the committee. Thank you for being here, for educating us, sharing your history and your struggles with everyone here. To Mr. Rajabi, thanks for being here in person today. And everyone else by Zoom, Ms. Kerr, Giovenda, thanks for joining us. I believe you're in another time zone. And to Mr. Karimi, thank you also for joining us by Zoom. And from Canadian Hazara Humanitarian Services, Mr. Mohibi and Ms. Ahmadi, thank you both for being here today. You're free to continue on with your day. We have some minor element in our for us to pass our budget around this study. Everyone received it on Monday to their emails, and it's for a total of $7,700 for standard equipment, and so just seeking everybody's approval. Thank you, everybody on Zoom. And just to share with everyone today, our report on Tibetan residential schools in China was submitted to the Commons at earlier on today at noon or so.
Oh.
So it's public. It's public.
Okay.
Merci. Bienvenue. Donc.
Thank you.
J'espère.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today, and hope you have a good weekend. And
our last week in the Commons till the summer. And again, to all the witnesses, wishing you well, strength, and everything that's good. Thank you for being here.
Merci tout le monde.
We're adjourning.